Greetings, students, and happy chapter number 2 in human development. So today we're going to talk about theories, and don't freak out. Theories might sound like a really super smart word or like something that's far out there, but I'm going to explain how theories are really useful, helpful, and set a foundation for you to continue on through the rest of our learning time together as we just study human development. All right, so guiding questions: how do theories help us, like in real life? How have you seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs at work? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is related to psychology. We're going to show you what it looks like and how all of us can apply to that hierarchy of needs. Which of the following theories do you find most interesting? They're actually kind of cool. Yeah, so theories help us to get practical advice, right? So again, think of it this way. If we didn't start off with a question and do a scientific study to find out that pregnant women should take excess amounts of folic acid when they're pregnant, you know, theories help us to guide us to say, that's what we learned. So it helps us in that scientific method process that we mentioned last time. All right, so let's talk about these 5 questions that we're going to be able to answer in our time together in human development. So number 1, some important questions. Do early experiences, like experiences of being breastfed or not when you were a child, or experiences of having a healthy relationship with your guardians or parents, or being abused or suffering trauma as a child, do those experiences in your early childhood, back when, do they linger into adulthood? Even if they seem to be forgotten, even if you don't remember any traumatic experiences, or you don't remember whether or not your mom breastfed you, right? Even so, what do you think? Does learning depend on specific encouragement, punishment, and role models? What do you think? Yes or no? Do people develop moral principles? When we talk about moral principles, we mean knowing right from wrong, right? Understanding murder is wrong. All of those things, even if they're never taught. So even if their parents never explained to them that murder is wrong, do we get that? Does culture guide behavior? Does our culture guide us in the choices or the behaviors we make in life? Is survival a basic instinct underlying all personal or social decisions? So if you were on an airplane flying over the Himalayan mountains in the snow and your plane crashed, would you eat your dead passenger next door? Would you become a cannibal in order to survive? Yes or no? What do you think? The answer to all of these questions is yes, right? And so number 1, do early experiences, the experiences of trauma or being breastfed, do those affect us in our adulthood? Yes. The psychoanalytic theory is going to talk to us about how those things had a huge impact on who we develop into. And so we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. Does learning depend on specific encouragement, punishment, and role models? Yes. We create behavior, right? As a parent, right? Or even if you have a dog, right? As a pet owner, can you make your dog do tricks? Can you teach your children to pick up their shoes when they come in the house or put them in a certain place? Can we create that behavior? You bet we can. We do it by punishing you if you don't do something we want. We do it by rewarding you when you do something we want, right? We do it by showing you, by being a role model and how you should do something. We definitely create behavior. Do we all know right from wrong, even if we were raised in the foster care system and we never had anyone tell us this is how it should be? Yeah, we do. The cognitive theory really says that there is something instinct in us that really knows right from wrong. Does culture guide behavior? You bet, right? So think of, for many of us who have a big part or are invested in our culture, right? Your culture has values and beliefs. So your culture may believe that this is the way you respect elders, right? And therefore you behave that way because your culture believes that. So our cultural beliefs very much guide our behavior. Is survival a basic instinct? You bet. If you're stranded on a mountainside, you and your fellow passengers that are alive, you will eat other people because Surviving is a basic instinct. You will do something that many of us would think of as reprehensible and immoral and gross or whatever. You would do it to survive. That's humanism, right? And so theories, all of these 5 that I've just talked about, they're theories. We're going to talk about them. All of our time that we have together, we'll be discussing them, and they really do answer some cool questions for us. All right, let's talk about our norms, right? So norms are kind of like standards that a society sets up, right? And different societies set up different standards. Here in America, we have different norms. So let's look at the slides here. So we see here that here in America, when our kindergartner is going to have their very first day of going to kindergarten, right? Most of us as parents of our kindergartners, what are we going to do? We're going to make sure that our son or our daughter, they have their backpack, they have their Hello Kitty lunch matching pail, they have a pencil case, they've got all their school supplies, and we send them off to kindergarten, right? That's a norm. It's the standard that we think that all of our kids have to have all of their supplies to go to kindergarten to be prepared. Well, as we look at these slides, we can see that, you know, worldwide, that's not the case. In Russia, kids don't need to come to school on the first day of kindergarten with their backpack full of supplies. What they need to come to school with is flowers, because it's a tradition that in Russia, you as a child bring your new teacher flowers, right? And so therefore you can see that if a child doesn't do this norm, it's presents anxiety. It's like all of a sudden the child is like, everybody else has flowers and I don't have flowers. I don't like that feeling, right? I feel scary. I feel anxious about it. You know, I did something wrong. It's stressful. And so that's what we're saying is a norm is kind of a standard, a society standard. Think of it with our, you know, almost our elementary age kids, but our preteens. Having a cell phone is like becoming a norm, right? I mean, how many kids have a cell phone? And the age at which our kids are getting a cell phone goes younger and younger. So we're getting into elementary school where our 5th and 4th graders are having cell phones. You know, it just continues. And so that is becoming the standard that we have in society. All right, so again, we're going to talk about these different 5 theories. We're going to talk about them all semester or all session long together, right? The first one being the psychoanalytic theories, and this would be Sigmund Freud. Most of us have heard of Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud was one of the theorists that we'll talk about when we talk about the psychoanalytic theory. The psychoanalytic theory, the word sounds really long or whatever, but you know what? It's super exciting. This is my favorite theories to talk about, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it because it deals with our emotions, why we feel the way we feel, why we do what we do. So the psychoanalytic theory, we'll talk about Sigmund Freud. He believed that we had these different parts to our personality. He believed that all of the different stages of development as we grow are related to our psychosexual stages. Now, understand that, you know, Sigmund Freud, a lot of his work has been discredited. In other words, we really don't believe it because there was no scientific research behind it. Remember last time we talked about the scientific method, and we said that to prove something you need to go through this scientific method, and Sigmund Freud didn't do a lot of that. And so there's some things that we kind of know have panned out to be true through the scientific method, but a lot of his beliefs not so much. Right? One of the things that Freud had right was what we call the oral stage, right? And what that says is, look at this picture here, right? How many of us have seen this? We've seen a baby, and what do babies do with their mouth? They pretty much put everything they can in it, right? So babies will pick up dirt off the ground, they will suck on stuff, they will just go through this, what we call the oral stage, which is a normal developmental process of wanting to put everything in your mouth. And what Freud says is that if you have a parent or a guardian who doesn't allow a baby to go through the oral stage, meaning that every time the baby tries to put something in their mouth, they push it away. Every time the baby tries to suck on something, they push it away. Most of us have kind of like a pacifier, so babies can suck on the pacifier. They don't allow their child to do that. When parents do that, what happens is when this child, this baby grows up to an adult, the adult has what we call oral fixations. The adult will bite their nails. They will chew on pencil chops. They will overeat. because what happened is when they were a baby, they did not go through the normal developmental process of kind of sucking on things and being able to put everything in your mouth that babies do. As parents, all we do is try to keep everything sanitary or try to keep everything clean because we know they're going to want to do that. But when we are withheld from doing that, then it manifests or it shows up in adulthood. And so I tell parents, even though you may not like it, you need to let your babies go through this stage because it's healthy for them, right? But this is one of the things Freud had right. All right, the theorist we're going to talk more about as we talk about the psychoanalytic theory is Erik Erikson. He was pretty cool. Erikson said that instead of our growth or our development as humans being related to psychosexual stages, which is what Freud said, Erikson says, no, it's really about your family, it's about your culture, and it's about all of these different stages that we're going to talk about. Erikson kind of had it right, and research has shown this to be true. And so we'll spend a lot of time talking about these 8 stages that all of us will go through it, right? 8 stages all of us will go through as we develop into later life. Right. The second of the grand theories, the second of the 5 theories we're going to talk about is behaviorism. And here we have the theorists named Pavlov and Skinner. And these 2 behaviorists really talk about how we can create behavior. As I said, we can create behavior in kids, in animals, in our employees, right? We can use rewards and punishments, right? Conditioning. So conditioning is really when our learning takes place through these responses, right? And a way to condition someone or reinforce them is to continue that process. So a reinforcement is a consequence that follows a behavior that makes the person likely to do the behavior. So if I were to basically continue to give my kid, for every A you bring home, I'm going to give you $10. Right? I'm reinforcing, I want A's. And my child is going to say, I want money. So I'm going to bring home the A's, right? This is a reinforcement, right? Process of what's going on. I'm conditioning my child to behave in that certain way. The observational learning theory really says that kids learn by watching people. They learn through modeling. They are observing. So your child is learning something by watching someone. They may have a favorite athlete or a favorite actor, or it could be their teacher who is the person that they are watching and they are observing and they're learning and saying, I like that person. I want to be like that person. Therefore, I'm going to watch what they do and I'm going to copy what they do. I'm going to model what they do. Now, they may never talk to that person, right? It's just the observing of the person and the learning from observing of the person. And that's the observational learning model, right? So the social learning theory really says that learning occurs, that our kids are taught through observing and imitating people, right? So they focus on the behaviors they can see, and they have more interaction with the person. So they're learning socially why you do what you do, right? Why does the person I like do that? I'm having conversation with them. It's a little bit more engaging than the observational learning theory, right? Social learning, we learned through socially. All right, so again, behaviorists we're going to talk about Pavlov. When we talk about classical conditioning, we always talk about Pavlov. So for the exam, understand, classical conditioning Pavlov, right? We'll talk about what he did. Operant conditioning is Skinner. Classical conditioning, Pavlov. Operant conditioning, Skinner. Let's talk about what classical conditioning is. So Pavlov said in classical conditioning, he said he did the famous dog experiment. And this is what he said. He said, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a dog and I'm going to feed the dog. I'm going to drop food down a chute. And every time I do that, I drop the food down, I'm going to have this bell ring. And what happened is the dog started to learn every time, wherever I am, if I hear the bell ring, I know food is coming. And so what would happen is every time the dog would hear the bell, the dog would come running. The dog would start salivating, right? Because the dog is thinking, food is coming, I'm hungry, I'm salivating. So that's what he did. You ring the bell, dog comes, there's food, right? What he did at some point, though, was he went ahead and he took away the food. So what he would do is he would ring the bell. No food came, but the dog would come and salivate. And he continued to do that. And what happened was the dog, every time, even though no food came, the dog would salivate, right? And so he had classically conditioned the dog to learn bell means food, I salivate. Bell means food, I salivate. He had classically conditioned him. And that's what we mean when we talk about classical conditioning. The stimulus is the bell. The sound of the bell causes the dog to salivate. That was the classical conditioning. And then we'll talk about operant conditioning. Skinner says he takes it a step further with operant conditioning. With operant conditioning, he says, I'm going to use a reinforcement or a punishment. I'm going to use rewards and consequences to make you do the behavior, right? So in this case, he said, okay, I'm going to reward you for good behavior, and I'm going to punish you for the behavior I don't want. And that is going to create behavior. And that's what we do. As parents, we do this every day. Every day we teach our kids that I didn't want you to do that. I do want you to learn this. And now my reward could be praise. It could be that I say, oh, Jimmy, you were awesome today, Jimmy, because you helped carry the groceries in with mommy. I'm so proud of you, right, Jimmy? That praise is a reinforcement because children love that. They need it. They need our praise, right? And so that praise is a reward, or the consequence is a timeout, or the consequence is something else, right? But we are consistently creating behavior, right? And again, you can look at that, those slides there. Now let's move on to the third theory of our grand theories, or the five. The third of the five is the cognitive theory. Cognitive meaning, our brain, how our brain works, our thinking. This is Piaget, isn't he cute? Piaget was this amazing theorist who really said that so much of the way our brain works is based on our thoughts and our expectations, right? What we expect and what we think at certain times of our life, whether you're 5, whether you're 10, whether you're 15, changes, right? And Piaget talks about assimilation. And assimilation is when we have a new experience we've never had before and we fit it into our old idea. So for instance, if I was a mom and I took my child to a park every day, or I took them to the same park, right? They had the experience of what it's like to go to the park. However, let's say I take my child to a different park. What's going to happen is my child is going to assimilate the new experience. Your child is going to say, oh, wow, I thought a park, they had tan bark and they had a swing set. This park has sand and they have a jungle gym. Wow, so this is what a different park looks like. So your child is assimilating the new information of what a park looks like into their old idea of what a park looks like. So Piaget, that is the name of the theorist that whenever we're talking about cognitive theory, he's the one we're talking about. All right. And again, this is what Piaget says. Piaget says that during different stages of our life, our thinking changes. So in this first slide, A, this is what we call the sensory motor stage. So if you look at this toddler is having a wonderful time in the flower field. And this is when our learning is based on our senses, because our brain is not really able to process information yet. And so it's based on our senses. So a baby and toddlers, they learn from touching, smelling, tasting, right? Hearing. All of their senses, their 5 senses, come into play in how they learn. However, if we move on to slide B here, we see we're now in the concrete operational thought, which means that this child has some understandings now of how things work. The child knows this plant will not grow or live if I don't water it. And so now the child understands I must water the plant to make it live, whereas the baby, the toddler, did not understand that. And then we end up at the C, what we call the formal operational stage, which says an adult understands that flowers and plants are really beautiful, but you know what? I can also make a living off of flowers and plants. I can run a business. It's not just that it's something to look at that's nice, but it can be something really productive for me. And that's that formal operational state. So this is cognitive theory. Cognitive theory is how our brain changes through time. All right. And again, we'll talk more about those different stages. All right. So the fourth of our grand theories is called the sociocultural theory. Whenever we talk about sociocultural theory, we're talking about Vygotsky. Vygotsky says that we develop as human beings based on our culture, our ethics, and our sexuality. That we are products really of our environment. We're not products of our genetics. So the sociocultural theorist says, kind of like it doesn't matter what your DNA is, it matters the family that raises you, the values and ethics that they teach you, and your sexuality, whether you're comfortable with that, what is that sexuality, what did you learn from your guardians about sexuality, all of those things are going to play into how you develop. So the sociocultural theory, Vygotsky. And the last of our 5 grand theories is humanism. And humanism is really kind of the opposite of the sociocultural theory. It stresses the potential of all of us, right, to do basic good needs, right? But it says that we are products of our DNA, of our genetics, right? And it really says that as humans, we have these 2 long-standing, drives or goals or desires. Number 1 is to reproduce. We want to have babies. We want to leave behind a part of us or a next generation. That is a very natural desire. And the second long-standing drive we have is to survive. And that's why we said that you would become a cannibal if there was nothing else to eat. And that's what we say. So basically, humanism, the opposite of sociocultural theory, because again, it really plays heavily into our DNA and our genetics. All right, continuing on. Here we are at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Maslow says that forget about your culture, forget about everything else. We're first and foremost humans. And as humans, we have needs. And here is this triangle of needs that we have. And in order to get to the top, we have to go through each of the different stages in order. So he says that as humans, number 1, we need to have our physiological or our basic needs met. That means all of us need water, food, and shelter. We need to be able to survive the elements and to be able to do that. In other words, what he's saying is that if I'm starving, if I'm hungry, it's really hard for me to think about the exam that I have next week. I can't focus on that. If I am struggling with where can I get food, that is my first goal. Where do I get food from? Where do I get water from? Where do I get shelter? So all of us go through that basic level. And then if we master that, we have those things. Now we go to level 2. And level 2 says, okay, maybe I have shelter, but maybe that shelter is in a women's shelter, or it's in a, it's in a home where there's some trauma going on. And then I need to feel safe and secure. So step 2 says, okay, I've got food and I've got water and I've got shelter. Now I want to feel good. Do you feel safe? If you live in a shelter, you usually don't feel safe. If you're living in a home where there's abuse, you don't feel safe. And we need that. That's our second level of need, is to feel safe and secure. And as parents, that's our goal, is to provide that, right? Then our third level is love and belonging. Now I'm talking about being a part of my family. I'm talking about building relationships romantically, and I'm talking about having those interactions socially. But I don't care about those if I'm still starving, right? And so we can find that you may make it all the way to the top, and then we end up back at the bottom when you lose your job and lose your home and lose everything and you're starving, right? We have to have those first level needs met. That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All right, I'll let you read that on your own kind of time here. And what we're saying here is that in human development, I'm not going to talk about just one of those 5 theories. We take what we call eclectic perspective. Eclectic means like throw everything together, like multiple. And so what we're going to say is we're going to look at all 5. And we're going to look at all 5 of those theories to figure out why we are the way we are. All right, so again, a review. Keep this slide handy because again, you're going to be coming back to this slide throughout our whole time together, remembering the 5 grand theories. The psychoanalytic theory, we talk about Freud, we talk more about Erikson. Behaviorism and social learning, we talk about Pavlov, Skinner, and Bandura. The cognitive theories, we talk about Piaget. The sociocultural theory, we talk about Vygotsky. And then when we talk about humanism and evolutionary theory, we talk about Maslow, right? And so keep those in mind. And then again, I'll let you go through our learning slides so that you can see kind of if a lot of this information is sticking with you, and the answers are on the bottom of the slide so that you can get that. All right, we will see you then next time for Chapter 3.